Good evening and welcome to the City of Topeka Planning Commission meeting. We are a commission appointed by the mayor and the city council to plan for the orderly growth and development of the community, to hold public hearings, and to make recommendations to the city council on planning items. Please note that the city council rules state that the public hearings for planning cases shall be conducted solely by the planning commission. No additional public hearings will be conducted by the city council. Tonight's cases are tentatively scheduled to be heard by the City Council next month. Agendas can be found at topeka.org. Many of tonight's cases involve public hearings. For those cases, the procedure will be as follows. First, the Planning Department staff will summarize the case. Next, we will hear from the applicant or their representative. Then we will receive public testimony. Public comments should be addressed solely to the chair and are limited to 4 minutes. Chris, please take roll.
Mr. Armstrong?
Present.
Mr. Beck?
Here.
Ms. Cavazos?
Here.
Mr. Gales?
Here.
Mr. Hall?
Here.
Ms. Jordan?
Here.
Mr. Canar?
Here.
Ms. Ringler?
Here.
And Mr. Woods?
Here.
We have 9 in a quorum.
Excellent. Thank you. First, I want to recognize that we no longer have a vacancy. We are joined by our newest commissioner, Mr. Canar. Welcome.
Thank you.
And we have all 9 of us here present tonight, as well as our planning director, who's not stranded in a snowbank somewhere in New York somewhere. So, welcome back. So, we will start out with approval of the minutes from the January 25th meeting. Any comments or observations or motions?
So I would move we accept the minutes as printed.
Okay.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Chris, can you call roll for approval?
Mr. Woods?
Aye.
Ms. Ringler?
Aye.
Mr. Canar?
Abstain.
Ms. Jordan?
Aye.
Mr. Hall?
Aye.
Mr. Gales?
Aye.
Ms. Cavazos?
Aye.
Mr. Beck?
Aye.
Mr. Armstrong?
Aye.
Motion passes 8 with 1 abstention.
Excellent. Welcome back, Mr. Fiander. I'll let you have the floor.
Oh, thank you again, and for Mr. Chair and all staff and commissioners for holding down the fort. I heard it was much easier without me here, so appreciate that.
This is where we were going to ask, did you just get back? But we didn't want you to feel like nobody knew you were gone, so, you know.
Yeah, exactly. No, if you did, yeah, exactly. Nobody noticed, so that's okay. I wanted to also extend a welcome to Mr. Canar, to the Planning Commission, this fine group of volunteer citizens. We had a good meeting, and I think he brings excellent background and applicability to some of the fundamental challenges and principles we face up here. So, so welcome, Mr. Canar. With that in mind, I don't have any other communications. I think there was 1 page handed out before the meeting tonight, updated project sheet for the CIP. That should be all.
And a question, can you confirm this is still in the list, or is this not in the list that's represented?
It is in the list.
Okay.
Yes.
Super. All right, well, let's move ahead. We'll get right into action items. Item D1, Mr. Warner. You handling this one? Am I missing something?
Now, Dan, I'll have, Mr. Chair, thank
Actually,
you.
if you would, why don't we do, I don't have it down here, but we don't have any ex parte communication confirmation. It's not on the agenda, but it just dawned on me we did not do that. So I would note, before we move ahead, if you might, is there any declarations of ex parte communication regarding any of the items tonight? None? All right, we've got that out of the way, so we'll move ahead. Mr. Fiander, did you want to handle this item D1?
Oh, sure, Mr. Chairman. And just so you know, we took off the ex parte tonight just because there's no zoning items, so that's why I wasn't there. So this is a proposal that comes before you every year about this time where we bring a forthcoming CIP for the city, the capital improvement plan, to you so you can address two things. One, that it's consistent with our comprehensive plan, and then two, to add any of your findings or comments or questions along the way so that this gets ultimately then goes from here to be finalized with the city administration. The city manager will approve a draft that then goes before council. So any comments that you have, we will carry those forward. So, but the first and foremost, there is a local city ordinance and state law that requires that when that any planning commission has reviewed a capital improvement program and found that a specific public improvement facility or public utility of a type embraced within the recommendations of the comprehensive plan or portion thereof is in conformity with such plan, no further approval by the planning commission is necessary under this section. So you have been authorized by law to approve capital improvement plans, or capital improvement projects. If you find a consistency of the plan, then those projects don't have to come back to you one by one. So that's why we kind of look at the whole thing in mass. And tonight, Dan's going to go over. We have about 21 projects that we pulled out of the entire CIP for your consideration that we think might impact the land use and growth management plan or other elements of the comprehensive plan in terms of physical growth. We didn't put any maintenance type projects in there. These are all, would be new facilities and affecting capacity for growth, physical capacity for growth. So what we want to do is, he's not going to hit on all 21. I think we'll try to hit on a few, particularly in the street section, to make sure you have a sense of what those are. And all the projects that we've highlighted here would be consistent, but we want to make sure you also understand them. To help us do that as well, we do have some fabulous staff members in the audience tonight to help us. If there are specific questions that we can't help, we've got Sean Brunzer's traffic city engineer. We have Nikki Lee, our budget director for the city, and then Doug Gerber, our assistant city manager as well. So I think and then some others that we can help on any of your questions.
I did have one request. As we're getting started and there's might be a brief description of the map and some of the items, for the newer members on the commission, maybe just a brief summary of the Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 designations so people understand the relevance of each of those and how a project may or may not fit in those tiers?
Sure, I can do that, Mr. Chair. The nutshell land use and growth management overview. On the map, there are three colors, or actually there's three tiers. The light blue, which is Tier 1, those are the city limits. Tier 1 is our highest priority for growth. And so we look at anywhere where there's 5 city services, water, sewer, roads, police, fire, where those are in place or plan to be in place, that's where our highest priority is for investment. So those, for the most part, are within the city limits, and that would be so you'll hear Dan talk a lot about Tier 1. That's the city limits, and that's assuming that's where we already have our infrastructure and services already in place. When we get outside the city limits, then we break it down into Tier 2, which is, there's not much of that. That's kind of the royal blue on the edges. There are a couple infill areas. Tier 2 basically says it's outside the city, but it's ready to come into the city if a certain investment is made in that area for one of those 5 services. And then beyond that, the lime green on your screen on the map would indicate a tier 3. Those are outside the city. They are missing one or more services, major investments. They are not ready. They would not make us more compact or efficient, and they're not ready. It wouldn't be affordable to bring those basically into the city. So we try to focus most of the investments, all of our investments in tier 1 or any of those that can help spur growth within tier 1.
Thank you.
Dan, you want to review the projects or highlight some of those that we have in here, and then we'll take any questions along the way.
Commissioners, we're going to look at the memo that was handed out and just go over a few of the projects, again, focusing primarily on the streets, so it's the second page of your memo. And when we get the map back up, I'll point to those projects to give you a better idea where they're at. So the third bullet on that list is Southeast California Avenue, and that's a project to improve California to 3 lanes from 29th Street to 33rd Street. This is, like all of our streets projects, these are tier 1. This is a tier 1 project that is consistent with the comprehensive plan. It's also consistent with the recently adopted High Crest neighborhood plan, which called for improvement of California. So this project actually continues a series of projects on California to improve that road. As we move to the next bullet, which is the bike lanes on Southeast 6th and 10th Avenue bridges over I-70. It's pretty self-explanatory, that line item. That's an out year, essentially a placeholder. As I-70 gets improved in the future, this will be a project to install those bike lanes on those roads. And that project implements the Bikeways Master Plan. The next bullet there is Southwest Arvonia Place, Huntoon, and I-470. These are a series of projects to address street capacity issues in this area. This is a projects that implement the MTPOs, the Metropolitan Transportation Planning Organization's Arvonia Place study, which looked at the different traffic scenarios in this area. The next bullet there is infill sidewalks / pedestrian master plan. These are projects to repair and construct new sidewalks within the city. This project is consistent with the pedestrian master plan, which is nearing approval. Just a little background here, this line item calls for $600,000 per year in this version of the CIP. In 2015, it was $500,000, and in 2014 and before that, it was $100,000. So in the last couple of years, this particular line item's really seen an increase in the amount of money available for infill sidewalks. Skip down to Southwest Wanamaker Road, Huntoon, and I-470. Again, similar to the Arvonia Place line item, projects that address street capacity issues in that important intersection within the city. And then the next one is Northwest Tyler. This is a project to rebuild or improve Northwest Tyler Street to be a complete street. This is from Lyman Road to Beverly. This is in the, kind of hard to see, the North Topeka area. This particular project implemented recommendations from the North Topeka West Neighborhood Plan, which is a plan this body approved last month. And then finally, we'll look at 12th Street. That's the last bullet under streets. This is a project that provides funding to replace 12th Street between Gage and Kansas Avenue. This is in conjunction with a citywide sales tax project, so we're using a couple different pots of money to complete that project. It's ultimately a $7.2 million project, and this CIP line item will cover about $2.8 million of that project, with the half-cent sales tax covering the remainder. The utility projects are pretty much all tier 1 projects, except for on the third page of your memo, the second bullet is the west elevated tank. It's on Indian Hills Road. This project's actually located within tier 3 of the urban growth area. This project increases the capacity of the existing city, but also provides for some increased capacity for future growth in tier 1 or 2. So although this is in tier 3, it's still will help Tier 1 and provide for future growth. So that's the extent of the projects that I'll point out. Are there any questions about what you have before you?
Yes, Mr. Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question about one of the items, the infill sidewalks. That's part of the pedestrian master plan. I'm not sure, it could have been before I've been on. I know that you've shown me a copy of the pedestrian master plan, but I'm curious, when I read the description, exactly how we'll decide which areas will be serviced first and how priority will be given. If there's a quick 2-minute Reader's Digest type of way you could explain that to me to understand who gets what and when.
Sure. Commissioner Woods, I think, and I missed the meeting too. So, last month, was there a presentation on the pedestrian plan? Okay. So, we'll catch.
Sorry, people.
No, that's all right.
I'm sick.
I want to make sure if somebody else, so everybody hears this. Basically, we have prioritized about 18 different areas in the city that would be the highest demand for pedestrian use. Those are areas around schools, bus routes, parks, areas that do not, that would depend more on alternative transportation, areas lower income intensive care areas, and then also the areas that do not have sidewalks. There are other priorities. Those were the main priorities. Business districts, community centers. There's some others that are in there. They didn't weight as much. So those key priority areas were basically mapped and judged, and we came up with about 18 different areas, corridors, and those will be the areas we're going to focus on. Hopefully, over the next 10 years, we can have sufficient funding to do all those. Sure. About 22 miles of new sidewalks and another a little more than that in repaired sidewalks. And then we're not even counting the new arterial streets that are going to get new sidewalks in the sales tax project. So that's another 20 miles. So we've prioritized within those areas.
Sure, that's good enough for me. I just was curious. Basically what that means, I need to go back and read the pedestrian master plan, which I'm happy to do.
And to give you a quick preview, if someone was to ask you, well, where of those areas, where are we starting? We're proposing to start this year around the Quincy Elementary School in North Topeka East area, and then also on Southeast 29th between between Adams and California. There's sidewalks we're going to put in along there as well.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
To extrapolate on his question, just as a statistic, you mentioned 20 miles or so, plus or minus, of improvements within the work, and then based on new road work, another potential 20 miles. In the overall city limits, do we have a general number, linear miles of sidewalks that exist within the city of Topeka? Do we know what that is?
Mr. Chair, we do. You're testing me. So let me see if I can remember that number. We have about 1,400 miles of potential sidewalk. We currently have we have about 48% of that potential in the sidewalk. So that's going to be about 660 some miles of sidewalk are out there. With this plan, we will, it doesn't sound like much, but with this plan, we'll go from about 48% capacity to 51% capacity after all those miles are done of new sidewalk. And if you want to break that down even more, the major thoroughfares, which is our priority for sidewalk facilities, pedestrian facilities, They're at about 70% capacity right now. After all the street projects are done, we'll get it up to 80% capacity of sidewalk miles, which means sidewalks on both sides of the street. So that's pretty encouraging. We just have to, the funding is gonna be key here, so we just have to get the appropriate amount of funding over the next 10 years.
Fair enough, thank you. Any other comments for staff? No? Okay,
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make one correction that we discovered here. When Mr. Warren's talking about the Southeast California Avenue project, the first one, it should say 5 lanes and not 3 lanes. The portion that will be south of 33rd which would probably be 3 lanes, but this portion is projected to be 5 lanes.
okay.
Got that right.
All right, excellent. All right, no further comments for staff here? All right, seeing none, I think we have the opportunity then to open up the floor for public comments. At this time, we'll do that. As we discussed before, we do ask that you limit your comments to 4 minutes, and please address the chairman and be sensitive to the timeliness and others that may want to speak. So with that, anyone in the public section of the room that would like to step forward and comment on the project, please do so. All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close that. Any further thoughts or comments of the commission? Yes, Ms. Cavazos.
I just have a question. In the unfunded project list, will, with the safety issue of the pedestrian crossing on North Kansas Avenue in Noto, will that be something that will be addressed sooner than later with the North Topeka being expanded and things talking about the riverfront project? How soon will that be looked into, I guess?
That, Ms. Cavazos, the project is not currently, the unfunded list obviously is the stuff that couldn't fit under.
Sure.
And I don't know if you know, I don't know if you, or we've explained this, and I know we haven't. If we were to add basically something from the unfunded list to the CIP, it more or less means you need to replace something in there, because there's a policy cap of about $9 million a year in general obligation bonds that we adhere to, give or take a few $100s or thousands. But that's kind of the average over the 5 years that we want to see. So generally that's our goal. So anything on here, we have to find something to take off. So when you ask the question of when would we look at that, I don't have a good answer, because right now, I guess what we're showing here is for the next 5 years, these are the highest priority street, and this is a street project, these would be the highest priority street projects we would have. This is, I haven't really explained the project either, but this is more of a on the ground gates and channeling of pedestrians more safely over that railroad crossing connecting Noto to south of the tracks there to the rescue mission. So I don't have a good answer as to when. It's just something. The reason we have this is because we want to be able to show, keep things on the radar, because we know we need to do these. if we had the funding.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions of staff or observations? Seeing none, do we have a motion from the commission regarding this matter? Yes, Ms. Fingham.
I was just going to recommend a motion if people are struggling to try and verbalize it, but it would be upon review of the CIP, the Planning Commission determines that the CIP is consistent with the comprehensive plan. That would be your motion.
Okay, excellent. So, Mr. Beck, it looked like you were prepared to make a motion. Did she capture your thoughts almost
That's
identically?
exactly what I was going to say.
She is a very unique, special individual, isn't she?
So my motion would be, upon review of the CIP in its present form, that it does, well, I do believe that it's consistent with the comprehensive plan and would move to vote in favor of that.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a
Close.
second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion regarding the CIP as it's been presented? All right, seeing none, why don't we take roll? Chris?
Mr. Armstrong,
Aye.
Mr. Beck,
Aye.
Ms. Cavazos,
Aye.
Mr. Gales,
Aye.
Mr. Haw,
Aye.
Ms. Jordan,
Aye.
Mr. Kenar,
Aye.
Ms. Ringler,
Aye.
Mr. Woods.
Aye.
Motion passes 9-0.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, let's move ahead to item D2, the Elmhurst Neighborhood Conservation District. Ms. Hanslick, is this yours?
Mr. Chairman, I will kick this one off. And
Excellent.
the Elmhurst Neighborhood Association is requesting the initiation of a neighborhood conservation district zoning overlay for a portion of the Elmhurst neighborhood. We currently have one NCD on the books, which is the Westboro neighborhood, and that was approved in 2014. If this would get approved ultimately, it would be the second one. We'll hand this off to Susan, and she can explain what we're doing here.
Thank you. So the backstory on this is in 2013, the city approved a neighborhood conservation district enabling ordinance allowing neighborhoods who want to protect part of their historic character to apply to the city to do so. And so this is a neighborhood-based application process. They initiate it, they come to us and ask for our assistance in creating a zoning district overlay. So, as Dan mentioned, Westboro was the first neighborhood to do this, and so they now have a zoning district overlay of R1 NCD1. So they have their own special set of designs, or of zoning standards applied over regular R1 zoning. It's administered and enforced by the Topeka Planning Department, and the design guidelines that are in it reflect the existing character of the neighborhood. So each one of these NCDs is specifically tailored to each neighborhood and reflects the concerns of the neighborhood and identifies what it wants to protect. Our first step was to identify the existing architectural styles out in Elmhurst, and we were thankful to have help from the neighborhood to do so. There was extensive research already done, and this just gives you an example of some of the variety of the architectural styles found out in Elmhurst. We started going more in depth as far as where these what kind of block character each, or what kind of character each block had as far as what styles were present. And one thing that we really felt was the presence of a garage, whether it was in front of the house, behind the house, attached to the house, detached. That was one thing that we really wanted to capture as far as current conditions. So included in the handouts that you have are these two maps, with the one on the right showing where the garages are located, as that was something that the neighborhood wanted to address in its NCD guidelines. In the enabling ordinance, the city allowed for a variety of 18 different topics to be covered that the neighborhood could choose from, ranging everything from accessory buildings to minimum lot sizes or maximum lot sizes, window openings, fences and walls, all the way up to public art even. Elmhurst decided on 8 characteristics that it wanted to protect, or wanted to address with these design elements, and these being primary buildings, accessory buildings, building height, size and massing, architectural styles and details, setbacks, orientation, site planning, and fences and walls. What we're here tonight is to ask for initiation of this conservation district. But since the guidelines were already written out and documented in form for you, we wanted to go ahead and give you a brief overview of what was included in your packets. Granted, these will be coming back to you if you do decide to initiate. These would be coming back for an approval in a few months. So just to briefly cover what these touch on, these would only apply to residential properties that only address new construction and substantial additions. Substantial additions would be visible from the street and would be new construction that would increase the square footage by 10% or more of the primary structure, so a new room addition that would increase it by that much. And then all lawfully existing structures and improvements that would be made non-conforming would be grandfathered in. So what the Elmhurst Neighborhood Association wanted as far as primary buildings, they wanted to keep the residential character of this neighborhood so that only single-family residential housing shall be allowed. For accessory buildings, they wanted that no metal storage sheds or carports should be permitted and that garages would be detached and located to the rear of the primary structure. And we did include illustrations in the design standards where we could to clarify what the standards' intents were. For building height, we wanted to reflect what was currently out there and felt that all new residences being between 1.5 to 2.5 stories high would capture that. Building size and massing, with the intent being to keep the size of new construction to similar of that what's existing on the block. So we'd be able to go and look and see what current structure is already there, and so that new construction would be of comparable height and square footage to what's existing. For new construction, would want them to utilize one of the identified architectural styles, and substantial additions should be consistent with the main house or other properties on the block to keep the feel of the fabric of the neighborhood intact. Building setbacks, build to plus or minus 10% of the average setback on the block, so keeping with the building line that you see on the street when you drive through. New residences should face the street, and no chain link fences should be allowed in the front yards. So what happens next is that we ask that you allow us to initiate the Elmhurst Neighborhood Conservation District zoning overlay, and that would allow staff to hold a neighborhood information meeting for the zoning change and then come back to you, hopefully at the April 18 Planning Commission meeting, to hold our public hearing on this matter. And I stand for questions, and we also have representatives from the neighborhood here to address you as well.
Thank you, Ms. Hansley. Fellow commissioners, any question for staff regarding?
Mr. Chairman, I have one question.
Yes, Mr. Hawk?
In looking at the fence portion of the regulations, I noticed it talks about fences within or in front of the front face of the residence, and it rings a bell to me with some discussion about some other areas in the city that had conflicts about that. And I wondered if this is becoming a conflict in the making here, or if having fences in front of the face of the building is acceptable now or not, or if that was specific to Westboro only.
Nobody's reaching for their mic here. I'll help out. I think what, Commissioner Hahn, what you're referring to, is our first NCD in Westboro. They have a standard that there is no fences to be placed in the, beyond the front face of the structure, if I recall. That's right. There was some debate as to what is the front face. And actually we've, what, is it the porch? Is it the actual, the wall of the house? So I think we've gone back to try and clarify that in those, in that NCD as to, in the future, it would mean the wall of the house. I'm looking for confirmation. Is that correct?
Yes, and actually, the way this one's written is that it's not in any designated front yard, so that takes some of the ambiguity out of defining the front face of a structure.
Well, as I read it here, it said that if it was 4 feet high, it could extend beyond the face. It doesn't say how far. The last bullet point, is what I was reading, unless I'm misunderstanding it.
Is that in the third column over?
Yes.
Okay, yes. The third column over reflects the current zoning code requirements in R2. The second column over reflects the NCD
Okay,
design standards.
all right, I see now. Thank you.
Commissioner, you do bring up a good point. It's something I think we'll work through, is whether or not that language clarifies it enough or not. As I'm, this is a total draft before you, and you know, we don't want to step into anything again that doesn't have some clarity. So a front yard is going to have to be defined, in my opinion, as we go through this.
So Ms. Hanslick, if you'll indulge me, I've got a couple questions here, and let me know if I'm out of line, but let's say that my house burns down, and I decide to rebuild, and I do not consider any of the styles listed to be suitable from the new construction by which I choose to replace my home. Yet, the new construction is significantly well-designed architecture, and I could consider it to be modern or, you know, even forward-thinking, but it's well-designed and meets all the kind of standardized expectations that good architecture would. It just does not fit in the neatly shaped boxes that have been delegated for this neighborhood. What are my options by which to pursue my intentions?
Oh, are you sorry, we're interpreting here.
So I'll
are
get to
you-
the
are you-
point. You have set this up, if I read it, that I can only build one of the selected styles listed. And if you'll indulge me, they start in 1880s and they end in the 1960s, of which Cape Cod is listed specifically in that time period, but the others fall within that. Now, mind you, 1960 is more than 50 years ago. So I'm just simply asking, I realize that we've tried to capture a neighborhood that is going to be forever stuck in an era. Is that practical thinking, or is it sound thinking to allow for well-designed architecture outside of that range to coexist in that neighborhood, even though it doesn't meet one of those neatly designated spaces?
Well, I'll try and get you to where at least we have some answer in terms of process. I believe the standards are set up for the owner or builder to show us how do they meet. We don't prescribe necessarily that the new structure has to mimic or even replicate what's there.
I don't want to interrupt you, but shall I read?
Mhm.
Each new residence shall be constructed consistent with one of the architectural styles currently identified on its block as shown in the architectural style map. So that means it has to be in that style. I would
Yes.
argue that Cape Cod is actually New England, it's not the Midwest. Now, excuse my sarcasm, what I'm trying to do here is I know these neighborhood things, I'm supportive of this process. In fact, I voted for the Westboro one that I live in, don't necessarily agree with it, but I voted approvingly of it. However, this is the next one that come up that gets into the weeds on architectural style. And I have my concerns in that we create a limitation here for a property owner that's given the opportunity, whether it's an infill lot or a replacement project or something, to still do a well-designed residence. And yet they're required to build a structure that, one could argue is actually indicative of another location in the United States or of a different era, and would not necessarily be how someone would build with good sound practices today. So and the reason why I'm bringing this up is I think if there's a weakness to this, is that there isn't a roadmap by which an alternative, well-designed structure could still be accepted if it's not exactly as listed. And I support keeping some consistency. What we don't want to have is someone with one of these styles of homes come in and make changes to it that either don't comprehensively create a new, well-thought-through design, or make sure the addition falls within the contextual design that's there, and you end up with a monster, that's a haphazard collection of different times and eras and materials. So that's not really clearly defined in there for those that would actually do something outside of the box, but well thought through.
I would say, and we're not regulating this, my intent here, or our intent, but I will tell you, this is a start of a conversation whenever you enter into a design discussion. It is not the end. This is what you see here, and whether it's a Cape Cod or Foursquare or whatever, we're not trying to dictate through this. We're trying to share with, hey, here is the character. Can you achieve that in the new building? You show us how. We're not going to tell you how. So you may have a very well thought out, as I know you do, something in your mind that you could bring to the table that nobody would have ever thought of that could fit. And I'd like to think, and I'm telling you, just from my standpoint and our staff standpoint, that is the beginning of the conversation, to say, oh, okay, well, yeah, sure. I think if we get too prescriptive, then you lose the flexibility. This is we want to have, this is not a historic district, so there's different types of criteria that goes into that. This is meant to be a little more flexible. We're trying to weed out anything that is incompatible with the area. So to that end, that's our first goal, is to not take away from the area. And then the next goal will be to further complement the area. So I would say, if you can look at these as more of a palette that what's out there to begin a design from, we are. I don't have any thought that we don't have enough prescription in here to say do exactly this. You show us how it would be reflective of what's out there, and then I think that'd be well received. That's I don't know if staff has other further comments of anything, but we're trying to weed out things that are going to take away.
Fair enough.
If I may follow up?
Sure.
One thing to keep in mind, well, actually, not to keep in mind, but to share with you, is that I've had the pleasure of working with the neighborhood when they crafted these design guidelines, and I've been blown away with the passion that they've had for the history of the neighborhood. And we held 2 neighborhood meetings before bringing their application to you. And to hear them talk about the restoration that they're doing for their houses in keeping with the architectural characteristics of the historic period, repairing things that previous homeowners had done in repair projects that just destroyed the character. That really epitomizes what the goal that I've heard the neighborhood echo is with this neighborhood conservation district. The characteristics and the design standards listed in this weren't designed by the city. They're written by us for the language and the technical language, but the goals behind them, what they hope to achieve, that was all vocalized by the neighborhood themselves. And I know Mr. Galbraith can speak to the many meetings that they had that I was able to attend, and I'm sure there were many conversations that I wasn't a part of as far as figuring out what they wanted to protect with their neighborhood, be it with the architectural stylings, the feel, the nature, and just to represent the character of the neighborhood.
Okay. I'll leave the continuation of my debate for another day. So with that being said, is there any other comments or questions for the staff? Thank you for indulging me, by the way. Seeing none, this will give the representative of the neighborhood an opportunity to step forward if they would like to and speak on behalf of the neighborhood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Mark Galbraith. I live at 1230 College. I'm the president of the Elmhurst Neighborhood Association, and we appreciate this opportunity to come before you tonight and talk just a bit about our neighborhood and our plan, and I'll try to keep it really brief. We also, I want to just say, appreciate the fact that City Council has made this ordinance available to us and other neighborhoods in Topeka, historic, older neighborhoods, because we think there is value in the historic character of our neighborhood and other neighborhoods, and it's nice to have a mechanism available that gives us just another tool to help protect that and preserve that, and so that's what we hope we've done, and we hope you think so too. Elmhurst was developed in 1909. That was the first year I think houses were made available, and kind of maybe somewhat uniquely for a fairly small neighborhood of about 400 homes. We do have a wide variety of architectural styles, and we like that very much. It is a bit odd, but we think it's a grand thing. But you know, most of those styles, in some way, I think, sort of cross the big pond in the 1900s and borrowed from the British arts and crafts movement. And some of those elements I think, can be found in most of the homes in Elmhurst, you know, regardless of the actual style. I mean, there was emphasis on originality. And because these are in some way sort of hand-built homes, there is room for originality in most of them. There's a kind of a common thread of simplicity throughout most of them. Lots of use of local materials. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, our neighborhood historian found some evidence of, I think it's 4 homes in Elmhurst that were built with lumber from a local lumber yard that was actually located downtown at the time. It's just kind of an interesting finding. So we do have that local material, I think, in the homes. And of course, lots and lots of woodwork throughout. Much of it's exposed on the inside, but inside and out. And just lots and lots of craftsmanship. I think you can see that everywhere. And so there is sort of a simplicity, but there's also a great deal of artwork in these homes. And we sort of think of it as a marriage of art and function. And we're very pleased to live right in the middle of art and function at the same time every day. It's a real treat. But we think that's a real characteristic, and we think all of that really is worth preserving. And I might just say, I'm not sure exactly how we do that, and except maybe trying to preserve the architectural styles that are there now. There may be some other way, but I think our concern is that we do have a number of vacant properties in the neighborhood, and houses that maybe where some houses burnt down usually, so a vacant tract, and we are somewhat concerned about what might be built there. We think maybe a split-level house is a fine house, but it might look kind of odd in the middle of Elmhurst, and it might begin to affect, the value of that historic character that's there, because it begins to say it's a neighborhood of something else. But I don't know, just a thought. I must also mention, because I think it's an interesting thing, when you read about homes built in America at that time, you read about the architects trying to sort of ennoble the American middle class within these homes because of the way they were built, but also because the American middle class was really, really growing rapidly at that time. And so we sort of, Elmhurst has always been a middle-class neighborhood. We still sort of see it that way. We think it's just nice to note that when we talk about it. So I took that liberty. Hope that's okay. So Elmhurst has changed a lot in the last 100 years. And one of the, the good change, bad change, one of the things that we saw and that really had an impact in our neighborhood was the movement to the suburbs. Not unique in Topeka by any means in our Elmhurst, but we did see that, did impact the neighborhood. Elmhurst was also upzoned for a while, which had a big impact on our neighborhood because it allowed homes that were built as single-family homes to be divided into 2 or more apartments. Had a major impact in the neighborhood. That's changed. We've been downzoned since then. We've seen some families move in and convert those homes back to single-family again. We'd like to see more of that, but we have seen some of that happen. So that's all good. And we've also seen, kind of a resurgence of interest in older homes. And so families have moved in to Elmhurst, new families. And we know we have to have that, or the neighborhood won't survive, won't thrive unless we have that. So that's one of our goals constantly, to find some way to attract new families, hopefully new young families with kids would be great. And we've also, of course, seen a new interest on the part of the city in older neighborhoods and older homes. And we're very pleased with that. We think that's a good thing. We think it does show the city recognizes the value in that. And obviously, I think that's where this ordinance came from. So we think that's very good. We started work on our neighborhood conservation district plan about 2 years ago. The work was done by a committee of our neighborhood association board, and it just took us a while to put it together, but we did some research, talked to the city a lot, and finally we thought put it together in about 2 years, and we said, good, we did a great job, patted ourselves on the back. And then we had those 2 public meetings that the ordinance calls for, and we quickly learned that maybe it wasn't such a good job, that our neighbors had a lot of concerns about what we'd put together, and they were very vocal about them. And we think that's very good. I think we thought those public meetings would just be just sort of a formality, but they were anything but, and we had good, long discussions with our neighbors. And I think, and we, in turn, incorporated almost all of what they recommended. And I think that in the end, it's a much better plan for that process and for those amendments. I think it's now a compromise. It gives us the protection that we think we need in order to preserve that historic character. But it's not so protective that it would discourage new development. We've had a couple of infill homes built in Elmhurst, and they don't look exactly like homes there, but they look a lot like American Foursquares, and they fit there very nicely. I think it also encourages and allows existing residents to continue to take care of those great old homes. So I think this plan that you have before you is a very good compromise. And I hope, of course, we hope you think so too. And I'll just stop and take questions if you have them.
Thank you, Mr. Goldberg. Any questions from the commission?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes, please.
What were some of the things that you said maybe you guys couldn't incorporate? Were there any major things that just you couldn't come to a compromise on?
That we couldn't come to a compromise on. Well, you know, I think we did compromise on almost everything that was brought up. You know, there was a big discussion about, our plan calls for no metal accessory buildings, outbuildings, if they're visible from the street. But we started out with just saying no metal accessory buildings. And we said that because we think those metal buildings often start to rust and kind of fall down. Joints become weak, and they just, we thought, could be and are in many cases kind of, you know, detracting from the architecture. So that's what we said. It was fairly restrictive at first, and we also had a piece in there about carports, and so our neighbors told us that reminded us that there were already a couple of carports in the neighborhood and a number of metal outbuildings, accessory buildings, and they thought that was very limiting for their use. They weren't so concerned about new residents, but for them as existing residents, because in some cases they have kind of limited property to build on, I mean, to put in accessory buildings. So we did compromise on that. I mean, they might have wanted us to just strike that entirely, but we reached a compromise where we say those things are permissible, but only if not visible from the street, so they could be behind the house, for example, or behind a fence, or behind a line of trees, or a piece of shrubbery, a line of shrubbery. So we thought that might have been maybe our most complicated compromise. And, you know, we were also, I think we first used that design standard having to do with windows. And we employed that because we thought to remove, for example, 2 windows on the second story of the front part of one of our homes could really begin to change the character of that home and can quickly make it look like it you know, just doesn't match the architectural style of that home. Excuse me. So we had not permitted that, but our neighbors convinced us that you know, they were taking good care of those homes, and there were things that they wanted to do to make them more habitable for them and their families, and it might mean altering those windows somewhat. So we thought it was a good compromise to remove that, to drop that standard altogether and rely on the standard having to do with architectural style in general. We thought we got enough protection there, especially with new development, and still giving our existing residents some flexibility to work with their home.
Other members of the commission? Mr. Goldberg, I did want to commend you and your fellow board members for your diligence. I had the pleasure of living in Collins Park for about 13 years, which is very close to your neighborhood, and my wife worked at Stormont Vale, and that wasn't very far apart, and we traveled through that area almost on a daily basis, and our kids went to a daycare not too far from that neighborhood, and what I liked about it is it just really epitomized kind of a sense of small-town life, even though you're in the big city, because of the variety of the homes and the very neighborhood feel of the area. Even though the variety was very broad, the homes all tended to have front porches, and you saw a lot of activity out in front of the homes, and just it's kind of what you wanted to see almost of any new neighborhood, regardless of the style, but it was kind of the character and the quality of the neighborhood. So I want to commend you and your board members for your effort and working with staff to help make sure that at least you're putting a game plan together to help preserve what's made your neighborhood successful to this point. So I do know that my house was built in the early 1920s that we lived in, and it was wood out of Louisiana, and the wood was so hard I had to pre-drill it before I could nail into it. So I guess if that's indicative of quality. It's not, doesn't make it easy, but you know it's not gonna fall down on you, so that's reassuring. So, anyway, with that, looks like we don't have any other questions for you. Thank you for your
All right, Mr.
Your
Chairman, thank you
comments.
very much. I'll share that with my neighbors. They'll appreciate that.
All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you all.
Chair, are you prepared to entertain a motion?
I am. Is there any further discussion or comments from the commission before we do? Yes,
And
Mr. Finder?
I would love any comments, yours, in addition to what we've heard already, just because if you do initiate this, we want to have, also be working on any clarifications, any revisions that you see that we should be addressing. So this is the time we would love to hear anything like that.
At the risk of being preemptive, Mr. Woods, if you'll give us just a few moments to
Certainly,
allow.
certainly, yeah, I didn't know if that's what you were calling for. so-
I know my wife's waiting for me to get home for dinner, but I'll stall her a few more minutes if it's the pleasure of the commission. Yes, Mr. Hall?
I do have one question. When the review and compliance with the guidelines that are given here falls on whose shoulders? I assume during the building permitting application, and that means who in the city will review and have the dialogue with the designer?
Commissioner Hahn, that you're looking at it, Adam. Yeah, that's between these two and myself. And then there's also, for major, for ones that are not clearly meeting the standards, we do also, in our process, would collaborate, or not collaborate, but bring in neighborhood representatives for comment as well, if it's not clear. And then, so you all know, if there are any disagreements over any of the findings that staff would make, they do get appealed, they can get appealed to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And that's the ultimate arbiter of any disagreements.
Commissioner Jordan?
Just kind of a statement. It's exciting to me to see a neighborhood go to all of the work and all of the trouble to initiate this, to protect their neighborhoods, because I think neighborhoods are the strength of the city, and it fits so well with our new land use planning. Thanks.
I did have one clarification item. I noticed that the NA being used in a lot of these items as you get to some of the last pages. Clarify why we don't have at least some minimal expectations on the driveways or the sidewalks, because those are kind of crucial to some of the character and the charm of the neighborhood. And I noticed there was nothing listed under current zoning. Are there some standards that we apply, or if you did have an infill lot development, what would be the governing standards there? Is it just citywide standards in lieu of neighborhood-specific standards?
Mr. Chair, yes.
Yes.
Yes. The neighborhood chose not to address those with more restrictive
Okay.
design standards than what's currently allowed. For example, for the driveways, those would fall under what current code requires. Impervious hardscape is not currently addressed in code.
Okay.
So those items, as they weren't selected to be chosen, didn't have any associated standards with them.
Fair enough. Just knowing how consistent this neighborhood is, I mean, there's really very little variation in lot and what have you. I didn't know if there was something that was applying specifically to it, so, okay. Any other thoughts or comments? Mr. Woods, I would entertain a motion if you're still so inclined.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we advance the Conservation District, or initiate, excuse me. Ms. Feeney was preparing the
Initiate the
channel me.
application.
Yes, correct.
For the
Initiate the
NCD.
application for the Conservation District for the Elmhurst Neighborhood Association.
Okay, excellent. Is there a second?
I would second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion on the matter?
Point of clarification?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, or Mr.
Um,
Finder.
A vote in favor of the motion does not mean you are in favor of the NCD. This is just to initiate and go through the steps to get it back to you.
Okay. And I would just reiterate my own observations, at the risk of beating a dead horse here, to be sensitive to what alternatives are out there regarding design when we do get explicit in the statement of design, yet I'm hearing that that's not necessarily explicit. But that doesn't say in there it's not necessarily explicit, but I'm hearing you say it's not necessarily explicit. So just sharing my observations.
We have taken notes
Okay.
tonight, and I wrote down modern interpretations. Don't know if that gets us anywhere.
I don't know if you're trying to quote me there, but I don't know that I said it exactly like that. So, anyway, we'll leave it at that. So we have a motion and a second, and there's no further discussion at this point. Why don't we take roll? Chris, please.
Mr. Armstrong?
Aye.
Mr. Beck?
Aye.
Ms. Cavazos?
Aye.
Mr. Gales?
Aye.
Mr. Haw?
Aye.
Ms. Jordan?
Aye.
Mr. Canar?
Aye.
Ms. Ringler?
Aye.
And Mr. Woods?
Aye.
Motion passes 9-0.
Mr. Finder, I see nothing else on the agenda. Is there anything else we need to review?
I do not have anything, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. If it's all right with the commission, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.